Hello and welcome to this session, and in this session we shall continue our understanding of the different types of pronouns. In this session our focus shall be on the reflexive pronouns. So what really are the reflexive pronouns? Well, have a look at these words: myself, yourself, himself, herself, itself. Well, you can notice that all of these are ending with self. In fact, such words in English that happen to be ending with self is what we refer to as the reflexive pronouns. Well, that way, have a look at these words: ourselves, yourselves, themselves. Well, here also you can notice that all of these are ending with selves, and obviously even such words in English vocabulary is what we categorize as the reflexive pronouns. Well, the difference between the two categories is that no doubt they are reflexive pronouns, just that the first category of words are categorized as the singular reflexive pronouns, whereas the second category is put in under the plural reflexive pronouns. But then, irrespective of whether it is singular or plural, I'm sure that you would have definitely come across such words in English sentences, and again let me tell you that all of these words is what we call as the reflexive pronouns. But then, when do we really make use of such pronouns? Let me explain. A reflexive pronoun happens to be such a pronoun that refers back to the subject of the sentence. In fact, we make use of the reflexive pronoun whenever the subject of the sentence and the object of the sentence happen to be the same. Well, what do really these 2 points mean is something that I shall be telling you moving forward in this video, but then you already know the third point, that the reflexive pronouns are formed by adding either self or selves to certain pronouns. Well, if you would look at these tables, then I'm sure you can understand that. But then the real question is as to when and how do we really make use of the reflexive pronouns. Let me explain. Have a look at this sentence: he blamed himself for the mistake. Well, this happens to be a valid English sentence, and just in case I'm going to ask you as to who is the subject of the sentence, then the word he happens to be the subject of the sentence. And in case I'm going to ask you as to who is the object of the sentence, then it is the same word he that also happens to be the object of the sentence. And so this happens to be such a sentence in English wherein the subject and the object are the same. And whenever you come across such a sentence, then definitely in that sentence you shall be having a reflexive pronoun, and in this case himself happens to be the reflexive pronoun. After all, the word himself is ending with self and is also referring back to the subject, and that is precisely the reason as to why himself is being categorized as the reflexive pronoun. Anyway, let me give you one more example to substantiate this for you. Have a look at this sentence: she blamed herself for the mistake. Well, in this sentence, the word she happens to be the subject of the sentence. Not just the subject, the same word she also happens to be the object of the sentence, and since the subject and the object of the sentence are the same, that you shall be having a reflexive pronoun in the sentence, and obviously the word herself happens to be the reflexive pronoun. After all, the word herself is referring back to the subject and is also ending with self, which makes it a reflexive pronoun. So now, in case you happen to look back at the definition, I'm sure that now you can understand that a reflexive pronoun happens to be such a pronoun that refers back to the subject of the sentence. Also, reflexive pronouns are used whenever the subject and the object of the sentence happen to be the same. So now that you have obtained clarity about the definition of the reflexive pronouns, let me give you a few more examples to substantiate this for you. Even before I give you more examples, what I want you to have is a look at the two examples that I have already specified. In the first sentence, he no doubt happens to be the subject and the object of the sentence, but then I am sure you understand that it happens to be a singular subject and a singular object. Similarly, in the second sentence as well, that she happens to be both the subject and the object, but even this happens to be a singular subject and object. Well, whenever the subject and the object happens to be singular, then the corresponding reflexive pronoun also happens to be singular. And let me tell you that both the reflexive pronouns, himself and herself, happen to be singular reflexive pronouns. Anyway, let me give you a few more examples of the singular reflexive pronouns. Have a look at these sentences. You blamed yourself for the mistake. I blamed myself for the mistake. It blamed itself for the mistake. Well, I'm sure that in all of these sentences now you can identify that yourself, myself, itself happens to be the reflexive pronoun. And why is the reflexive pronoun being used in these sentences? Well, that's because the word you happens to be both the subject and the object of the sentence. Similarly, the word I happens to be both the subject and the object of the sentence, and then in the last sentence the word it happens to be both the subject and the object. And since the subject and the object of each of these sentences happen to be the same, that the reflexive pronoun has been used. But then you also know that you, I, it, all of them happen to be singular. Well, that is the reason as to why we have made use of yourself, myself and itself, all of which happen to be singular reflexive pronouns. So I'm sure you understand that whenever the subject and the object of the sentence is singular, then the reflexive pronoun also shall be singular. But then if in case the subject and the object of the sentence happens to be a plural, then the reflexive pronoun used in the sentence shall also be a plural. Well, what I really mean, let me explain it to you through a few examples. Have a look at this sentence. We blamed ourselves for the mistake. Well, in this sentence, ourselves happens to be a reflexive pronoun, but is not a singular reflexive pronoun. Rather, it happens to be a plural reflexive pronoun. But then, why is it that I have made use of the plural reflexive pronoun here? That's because the word we in this sentence happens to be both the subject and the object of the sentence, but then you know that we definitely is not singular. We represents a group of people and hence it is categorized as a plural. And since the subject and the object of this sentence happens to be a plural, that the corresponding reflexive pronoun also happens to be plural. Hope I am clear with this example. Anyway, have a look at this next example. They blamed themselves for the mistakes. Well, I'm sure now you can easily understand that in this sentence, they happens to be the subject and the object, but then since they represents a group of people, that it is categorized as a plural subject and object. And since the subject and object is plural, that the corresponding reflexive pronoun, that is themselves, also happens to be a plural reflexive pronoun. So I'm sure that through all of this, you have been able to understand that a reflexive pronoun happens to be such a pronoun that refers back to the subject of the sentence, and it is used whenever the subject and the object of the sentence happen to be the same, and it is formed by adding the word self in case you have to obtain a singular reflexive pronouns, or by adding the word selves in case you have to obtain a plural reflexive pronoun. Hope this is completely clear. Anyway, let me give you one final set of examples so that it becomes completely clear for you. Have a look at all of these sentences. He prepared the entire meal himself. She prepared the entire meal herself. I prepared the entire meal myself. You prepared the entire meal yourself. It prepared the entire meal itself. Well, in all of these sentences, you can notice that the subject and the object of the sentence happen to be the same. What I mean to say is that he, she, I, you, it in all of these sentences happen to be the subject as well as the object, but then I'm sure you can notice that they happen to be singular in nature. And since the subject and the object happen to be singular in nature, that the corresponding reflexive pronoun is also singular. What I mean to say is that the words himself, herself, myself, yourself, itself, all of these end with the word self and hence are categorized as the reflexive pronouns, but then they are all singular reflexive pronouns because the corresponding subject and the objects happen to be singular. But then have a look at these sentences. We prepared the entire meal ourselves. they prepared the entire meal themselves. Well, in this case, obviously, ourselves and themselves happen to be reflexive pronouns, but then are not singular. Rather, they are plural reflexive pronouns. And why are they really plural? That's because the corresponding word we in this sentence happens to be both the subject and the object, but then since we represents a group of people, that it is not singular, rather it happens to be a plural. Similarly, the word they as well represents both the subject and the object of the sentence, but then they also represents a group of people and hence is not singular, rather it happens to be plural, and that is precisely the reason as to why we have made use of the plural reflexive pronoun. So all said and done, I am sure that you have been in this session able to understand everything that you need to know about the reflexive pronouns. But then you can also notice that there are still quite a lot of pronouns that you need to master, and all that you really need to do, if in case you have to master all of the remaining pronouns, is to continue watching this video series. Thanks for watching. Let's meet again in my next session.